The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek episode 50.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. Today we're discussing the Enterprise episode, Fight or Flight. It's the second episode of the series. Joining me today on the panel is Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Father Corey is away right now, and so he's not able to join us, so it's just going to be me and Jimmy today. So, Father Corey, we miss you. We look forward to having you back joining us.
Come back soon.
Come back. We do have some feedback that from you, our listeners, that we'll share at the end of the show, and we'll have some discussion of it. And so it's some really good feedback that covers the end of the Star Trek Discovery season. Mm-hmm. So it should be some interesting feedback for you. And remember, folks, to like The Secrets of Star Trek on our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, and to retweet our episodes on Twitter, where we're at SQPN. Leave us comments so we can share them as feedback, but also you're sharing them, liking them, retweeting them, spreads the news about the show and grows our audience. And that's one of the ways we know that we should keep doing this, is that we know we see more and more people becoming part of our audience and wanting to hear what we have to say. Let's talk about this episode. It's called Fight or Flight. It is the second episode of the first season of Enterprise.
After Broken Bow.
That's right. It aired in October of 2001. So we're talking, 18 years ago as we record this.
Just about.
The time frame it takes place, they're still using the old calendar, the old Earth calendar. So Archer at one point gives a log in, uses May 6, 2151.
10 years before the founding of the Federation.
That's right. So where do we begin? So, well, let me talk about the themes that I've picked out of this episode, just to sort of set the stage. The main theme seems to be...
It's right there in the title, Fight or Flight. What are you going to do? Are you going to fight or are you going to fly?
I suppose, well, in fact, I'd go another level, which is this difference between humans and Vulcans. This conflict that we see that is really is part of the fundamental idea of this series of Enterprise. It predates the Federation. It's before the Earth and Vulcan are buddy-buddy. We're still a little bit in conflict. They're the older brother keeping us down. And there's this statement that gets made by T'Pol in this, which is Vulcans don't let their decisions be dictated by curiosity, while humans do. And I'm thinking, that is a really dumb thing. I mean, that's not true. And we'll get into, some of the examples of that as we go along. But curiosity is not illogical, and it is not an emotion.
What would have saved it, and there's a dialogue fix for this, just insert the word mere in front of curiosity. Vulcans don't let their decisions be driven by mere curiosity. And suddenly all of her counter objections to what they're doing become more intelligible. It's like, this could be construed as violating someone's privacy. Going onto their ship without permission, that could be trespassing.
Right. Exactly. Yes. And the other thing that kind of comes up is how T'Pol is sort of a scold throughout this episode. She's like that older brother or sister who's always pointing out that you're not playing the game right when you are perfectly happy playing the game the way you are. Well, we're humans, so we're not going to do things exactly the way you would, T'Pol. So settle down.
Yeah. I had really mixed emotions about this. and this is far from, I mean, I don't actively loathe this episode the way I do some things, but I just felt so disappointed by this episode. I wanted to give it maximum allowance for the fact it's a first season episode, and first season episodes are often shaky in any series. And also because they're just building a writing staff, and these characters are not established. We've only had the pilot before this. And so it's understandable that a show can be shaky right out of the gate if you're planning on an ongoing series as opposed to a mini series where you know the shape of the story you're telling in detail before you start. But if it's an open-ended series, first seasons are hard and second episodes are hard. You don't have the same kind of initiating event that you do in a pilot. And so there's a kind of a steep learning curve the show's creators are confronted with in this episode. Also, I want to give it full allowance for the fact that it is early days, and so we're not where the characters will eventually get to. They're not all fully formed yet. In modern televisory storytelling, you're going to have character development over time. In the old days, you didn't. In the old days, just plop, here are our characters, and here's what happens with them. But now we have arcs that stretch over series, and so you don't want the characters to be where they're all going to end up emotionally and personally and so forth. So this episode is like waving its hands and shouting at the top of its voice, early days, early days, early days. and so I appreciate that about it. I agree. You don't want to start people where they're going to end up. My problem with this episode, so we have the fight or flight theme, which is the basic, do we fly away from this ship that we found, or do we come back and fight? So on the crew level of the story, there's that dynamic playing out. But even more personally, it's playing out for Hoshi. Yes. She's in over her head. She has to decide, am I going to stay on this job as a translator on this starship and fight metaphorically, or am I going to fly back to academia where I feel safe and unchallenged? And so that's fine, but I think this episode is really written in a ham-fisted, paint-by-numbers way. Yeah. Every character in this story has a single theme that it's like every member of this choir sings exactly one note, and they sing it over and over and over again. Trip wants to have encounters with alien stuff, and that's his whole thing this episode, nothing else. Hoshi is scared, and that's her thing, and she's sticking to it. Malcolm wants to use more force than is necessary, and that's his thing. T'Pol is oppositional to whatever Captain Archer wants to do, and that's her thing. Phlox is bemused by humans, and that's his one thing. Archer is enthusiastic, and that's his one thing. And Porthos wants cheddar, and that's his one thing.
I'm with Porthos. I want cheddar. Well, the one who doesn't fit in any of that really, who doesn't get really anything is the helmsman.
Malcolm. Yeah. Malcolm.
Not Malcolm. Mm-hmm. Malcolm's the one who wants to shoot everything.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mayweather, yes.
Yeah. Their names are too close together.
Yeah, they are.
But he doesn't really get much of anything.
He never gets much of anything. He's an underdeveloped character.
Right, exactly. That's what I was going to say. He doesn't. And you're right. Everybody's pretty much one note. They're. I mean, T'Pol's barely concealed contempt and even hostility
and arrogance
is a bit. Yeah. It's a bit wearying after a while. I mean, it wears on you.
Suck it up and go with the program. You signed on to this starship. Don't buck every decision at every turn.
She's like the dark cloud floating around the corridors of the ship.
Yeah, and as a result of, partly as a result of the flat characterization in this episode, nothing is surprising. Everything in this episode is paint by numbers. You know exactly what's going to happen before it does. They set up everything in an obvious way before they pay it off. The only moment in the whole thing that is really surprising is when they turn around and the silence is hanging from the ceiling. Everything else, that's the only surprise in the whole episode. Everything else they telegraph way in advance. Here's exactly what's going to happen.
You know, as soon as they're testing the torpedoes and they don't work, that's going to be an important plot point later. Like, they should just hang a sign on the screen. Important plot point for later. The torpedo will need to be working better than it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of thing. Yeah. So they've been out there for 2 weeks at Warp 5 and haven't seen anything yet, and they're impatient. And
Except they got a slug, which also is a cipher for Hoshi, because now it's in its not preferred environment and it's dying, and Hoshi is so sad about it, and they're going to let it go, even though it's in an environment that's not quite what you're used to. You'll adapt and it'll be great, and that's a symbol of me.
Right. That was a very clear... Yes, the slug who is Hoshi. And so she's conflicted. On one hand, she's the best exolinguist in Starfleet, so she should be out there on the flagship, heading out into exploration. On the other hand, she's frightened of deep space.
Yeah.
And so how could she do what she's supposed to do if she stays back on Earth?
And actually, I like that as a character conflict, and I like the fact she is scared of space. A lot of people would be. But people may have skills that, call for them to rise to a certain situation that they're not comfortable with. I like the fact that she's got little quirks. She's not comfortable in space. She's not used to the stars flying by her cabin in this one direction because her training missions had them flying by in a different direction. That's actually clever, to think about, okay, how would they be flying by depending on which side of the ship you're in? That's, that was fine. I liked that. I like that Archer is hearing a squeak under the floorboards.
I like that.
And is annoyed by it. Because
it's a brand new ship.
Yeah. And so a lot of these little details I think are just fine. It's the execution on the character level and the plot level that I have a problem with in this episode. Having said that, as negative as I am on this episode, it's way better than the second episode of Next Gen. That was the Naked Now.
Oh my!
And it was equally bad in the third episode, Code of Honor.
Oh.
So I think they have learned some lessons since Next Gen. It's not as bad as first season Next Gen, but it's also not as ambitious. It's very paint by numbers.
And it's not as good as first season DS9, frankly. So, yeah. I liked Archer's line to Hoshi when she says she's a bit claustrophobic, and he says, "Oh, but you took a job in deep space?"
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to make some sense. Also, the looking for the squeak in the floor of his office. I'm like, everybody can identify with the smoke detector that beeps at random times in the middle of the night, and you can never tell which one is beeping.
My solution is take the battery out.
One at a time. Take a battery out of each one at a time. It takes some time.
And leave them out.
Yeah. My solution was to buy the Nest ones so that it tells me on an app on my phone which one is dying.
Oh, okay.
So, it's a more expensive solution, that's for sure. So we have this line. We don't select our destinations, but what piques our interest to Paul. And she says 1 out of every 43,000 planets supports life. As her explanation for why they haven't run into an intelligent species.
Was it intelligent life, she said, or just life?
Intelligent life, she says. Yes. Okay. 1 out of every 43,000 planets support intelligent life. What do you think of that from a Fermi paradox point of view?
It's possible. It's hard to know, but that's not unreasonable given the parameters of the Drake equation, which we will feature in an upcoming episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
I just lined that one up for you, Jimmy. You hit that one out of the park. Good. We have this interesting Dr. Phlox encounter between Phlox and Trip at dinner, where he talks about first he says his people don't speak during meals, which can be tedious, and then which sounds a lot like a monastery actually, where they don't speak during meals.
Sounds like my family. Everyone sits down and we're done in 5 minutes.
And then he delights in the variety of food and talks about how unpredictable human beings are.
This is a fun scene. I like the little character quirks that Phlox has and his interesting, observations of stuff. He's eating a potato, and it's like a little tiny russet potato or something, and he's already bitten out of it, and he's savoring the taste. Which is interesting because potatoes are basically a vehicle for salt and butter.
Right.
But he then gives it to Trip and say, try the potatoes. They're excellent. And he's already taken a bite out of this thing. And you feel for Trip. It's like this thing has alien spit on it now. On the other hand, he's a doctor, so he should know if this is going to be okay for me. And I don't want to be rude and violate his cultural custom. He's trying to be nice to me here. So Trip sucks it up and eats it, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's resequenced protein like most of the food.
And that was a little snag for me. I was like, no, potatoes are primarily carbohydrate. They're not protein.
Right.
But it's a neat scene where Phlox is observing. It's like, you see those two crewmen over there? I think they're preparing to mate. Do you think they'd let me watch?
And it's these two people who are just kind of staring off into space separately. Yeah. They're not actually interacting. And then he says, the other one was, have you smelled Ensign Socorro after she exercises? She gives off a fragrance not unlike the adrenal gland of a Nausicaan.
Yeah.
Tell a woman that you meet sometime that she gives off a smell not unlike the adrenal gland of a Nausicaan.
When she's been exercising.
Yes. So they come across this immobile ship that's just sitting there, and they decide they're all excited. We want to talk to them, and T'Pol's like, no, let's just move on. Maybe they don't want to talk to anybody, and she's doing her wet blanket thing. So they hail it.
It's interesting. She does come up at every juncture with something reasonable in terms of why you might not want to do this.
Right.
You know, it's like they're a totally alien culture. I mean, would you want people boarding the Enterprise without permission?
Right. If you're not responding, would you just want people to, well, they're not responding. Maybe they need our help and come on board.
Not everyone answers a knock at the door. It's like, yep,
I know.
I'm certainly not going to do so at certain times of night.
Exactly. And maybe they're sleeping. Maybe some species, they
hibernate.
Fly their spaceships and they don't have round the clock shifts like say humans do. They stop the ship and go to sleep altogether for the night. And then they'll start the ship up again in the morning. Who knows? So they do hail it, and they have the translation matrix that they use, and Archer says, we come from planet Earth, which is essentially saying we come from planet Dirt.
Yeah, and then here's a helpful quasar map to let you know where our home planet is. I'm going, do not tell the aliens where our home planet is, please.
Exactly.
You don't know anything about them. That information needs to stay proprietary until we know somebody. I do like, though, that this is the first time Archer is giving a communique to an alien race, and so we see Trip in the background mouth the word Earth.
Right.
And we're from the planet Earth. And so it's like he's still working out what information needs to be given.
Right. You get the idea. There are no first contact protocols in place yet. They're still making it up as they go along. Yeah.
Well, we have first contact protocols now. They were developed like in the 1960s.
That's true. Which maybe they've been used already. So the thing is Archer's actions here, are they in this context where they see that the ship has perhaps been attacked, that no one's responding? But
there are life signs.
Right, and there are life signs. Is T'Pol right? Are his actions precipitous here?
I think, I mean, this is just from a human frame of reference, but they have evidence that this ship has been damaged. They have evidence of life signs and of people not communicating. That suggests distress, because the natural evolutionary response of any life form, if you're hurt and someone is trying to contact you who is not the person who hurt you, is turn to them for help.
Right.
And if they're not turning to us for help, that suggests they're in significant distress. And so it would be natural from a human point of view to say, let's go over there, see what we can find out, and see if we can be of assistance.
But if in the context of these might be aliens who don't operate on the same...
Well, that's why I framed it in terms of evolution. Evolution is going to drive any creature that's been attacked to seek help from any ally it can. And if it's not seeking help when you've made it aware or tried to make it aware, that suggests something is wrong here. It's not able for one reason or another to ask for help, but would still welcome it, because if you're in trouble, evolution is going to drive you to accept help from whatever source you can get it from.
I hesitate to disagree with you only in that, and I hesitate because I know you're probably right, but I hesitate to disagree only in that there are plenty of examples of creatures where when they're hurt,
they'll snap.
They snap, they retreat, they don't want help. But usually that's out of a lack of understanding.
Correct.
Of us. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I get that.
An intelligent life form that can build a spaceship is clearly a cooperative species that has social consciousness and thus is used to accepting help from others other than themselves. They're not self-reliant loners like a leopard or something.
Right. See, this is why I hesitate to disagree, but I'm glad we brought it up because So we have this scene of Archer with his personal log in his quarters with Porthos and the aforementioned Cheddar. I like Porthos as a element of the show, as a character, if you will, because it's a nice humanizing feature. It really kind of brings Archer down to earth. He could be sort of, especially at this point, sort of all bluster and you know, standing forth, but it really brings him down a notch to a more human level.
He's very not Kirk. He's very relaxed and get along, and this is apparently true of Scott Bakula, who plays him. He was everyone behind the scenes says he was just a delight to work with. He was totally unassuming. He was so helpful to everyone behind the scenes. He would even help like the crew whose job it was to load stuff up for location shoots. I mean, he'd be lugging boxes with the crew. and when it's not even his job, he's just doing it to be helpful. And I like in this episode, it's like when Hoshi wants to change your quarters with someone and says, I've already arranged someone I can switch with. He's like, okay, yeah, great. And then later on he says, so how did it go with your quarters? Was there any problem? You know,
right.
Very relaxed about it.
Even in the corridor where Trip is trying to make a case for going along to the other ship, it doesn't feel like this very rigid military chain of command. They're friends, and it is a more relaxed atmosphere. Clearly they have military weapons, and clearly there's a hierarchy on board the ship, but it's much more relaxed than a rigid chain of command. And he does tell him, look, this is what you're going to do. You're going to stay here with your engines because that's what I need you to do. Yeah. But it's not like that's an order, sir, mister, sort of thing.
Yeah. I also found it was interesting, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the pilot, but I found it interesting that because who the first officer on this ship is initially, it's Trip. Now they move T'Pol into that position, but in the original series, we had the captain, the first officer who doubled as science officer, and the doctor as main characters. Here, it's the captain, the first officer / science officer, and the engineer. And it makes sense for the engineer to have a more prominent role in this because the technology on board Enterprise is revolutionary.
Yeah.
This is the first Warp 5 ship, and so it makes sense for that role to have additional prominence given the fact they're dealing with breakthrough space flight.
I forget now, it's been a while since we talked about our overview of the series, but the idea of the captain, the Vulcan's first officer, science officer, and the other part of the triumvirate who is very Southern in culture. As a counter to the very stiff Vulcan. It's very interesting that they've brought that element up in this one again. I just thought that was...
What a coincidence. Who would have thought that?
So because this is the Enterprise and not the original series or later, we don't beam over to this alien ship. We get in suits and we fly over in a shuttle. And I like that. I like the sequence. I like them trying to get in. Reed wants to blast through the hatch. And
it's like there's no obvious controls here, so I would just want to blow stuff up. And this his sounding his one note again. Right. And Archer is, actually, here's a hidden control. Beep.
Yeah, I'm not sure why he thought those were controls, but okay. Of course, Hoshi has to be the one to find the dead bodies. I mean, that's so she can scream as she says, her line is like a 12-year-old, sort of emphasizing her own feelings of inadequacy. Thing. Well, nobody else screamed, she says. Well, they're hardened, experienced, Malcolm
they're not linguists from academia. Yeah,
exactly. And T'Pol advises them, leave the ship. They're dead. We can't save them now. Yes, so somebody has come along, attacked the ship, taken the people, the crew of it, hooked them up to some sort of machine that is harvesting their body parts, their
precious bodily fluids,
right? And has left, and presumably is coming back for it later.
Which
Not sure
doesn't
why.
make a lot of sense.
It doesn't.
Why don't you take it with? Why don't you just tow this ship with you to wherever you need? And why does it take so long? Yeah, take the bodies. And why does it take so long to extract this stuff? We later learn it's called triglobulin, and it's used for various purposes, including as an aphrodisiac by some species. And it's apparently very similar to human lymphatic fluid, so lymph.
Yeah.
But we don't know that at this point. We just know there's a scary machine pumping green blood out of the silence hanging from the ceiling.
Right. And so T'Pol says we should leave the ship,
Yeah, and your crew's in danger, and so that's why you should leave.
And in fact, I think T'Pol is right.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should leave it. What's done is done. Who knows who did it, what they're capable of, what their technology is. And in fact, they almost nearly get harvested, killed because
they go back.
Yeah. It's only by sheer chance that they actually survive this encounter.
Yeah, and I think that, probably what I would have tried to find a way to do in this situation, if it were real, would be something that's kind of in the middle. Because on Enterprise, they don't have a properly functioning weapon system yet. But on the other hand, we found these people and, learning about them and their culture. Let's try a download before we leave. Right. And maybe we can send a message to their planet if we can find it and say, hey, we found your guys. We wanted you to know about this. Send them the text of the Bible or something so that they can use lingua code to figure out what our main message is and also get evangelized. But I would try to find a compromise in here somewhere. Was like, okay, because we don't have the weapon system functional yet, let's minimize our risk. Let's back off somewhat, but also try to accomplish some of these other goals, as opposed to an either or, fight or flight. Right. There's some middle grounds here.
Exactly. Now, at this dinner, this awkward dinner and I like this feature of the show where they occasionally have this dinner that features the three senior officers.
The captain's mess, captain's table.
That's right. Archer, T'Pol, and Trip. And so at this dinner, Archer is agitated. He's upset with his own decision to leave.
Yeah, he is hating on himself right now.
And he lashes out at T'Pol.
And Trip.
But primarily T'Pol. And sort of, this is one of those things where we have these racist comments that they make at each other. Like, it's like T'Pol makes racist comments about humans and Archer makes racist comments about Vulcans. That seems to be that's a feature of this series, at least in the beginning. And he lashes out at Vulcans.
I don't know that I would classify all of this as racist. There are species differences. And so saying whether they're philosophical or biological or whatever they may be, it's fair to say, well, my people approach this situation this way and your people tend to approach it this other way. Yeah.
Just Archer says it in a bit hostile way.
Oh, yeah. He's mad.
And T'Pol shoots back in a more contemptuous way or arrogant way. So, you're right. There are real differences. But the way that they do it, at least desired. She says that Vulcans would never have boarded the ship because they don't express curiosity again. This is that curiosity thing. And I'm like, that's such a bogus claim.
Then why
did they land
science?
on Earth? Right. Exactly. How do you do science? Why did you land on Earth to make first contact then?
Well, that they have a reason for. Because they detected the first human warp signature. And so it's like, okay, these people are now playing on something like our level and could potentially be a threat. We need to make contact with them. Yeah. So that I can buy, but the whole we don't have curiosity. Well, then you would never have developed science or technology. And why do you have a Vulcan Science Institute? Right. What are you doing there other than organized curiosity?
Exactly. It's a bit silly. Then So Archer changes his mind, says, we're going back. We're going to do what we can for these people. He sends Trip over to get the communication system working on the alien ship, and sends Hoshi to decode their language. And I'm thinking, okay, I will. We have 1 hour or 45 minutes, whatever it is, to get this plot, completed. Mm-hmm. And so we can't have this extended period of time where they're having to figure out the technology and figure out the language. But the idea that you would decode the technology and the language in like 10 minutes, mm-hmm. I'm sorry. That's really hard for me to move past.
Yeah, it is. They could have done it better than they did. Like with Hoshi's stuff. Now, space technology I have no clue about, but I do know something about language, and they do have Hoshi gesture at concepts that are, real, and it's like, okay, I need to figure out this. I don't even know their basic conjugations. Okay, that's real stuff.
Right.
That you really need to know to be able to speak certain languages. And so I like that bit of world building, but then they fall down on other things. They should say so like Hoshi is talking into a link to their computer system and says the word ship a few times and it doesn't respond properly. And she says the word distress a few times on a few different occasions. And it's like, okay, that's not going to be the first word you figure out. It's not going to be distress.
Right.
It's going to be, the number one or something like that.
Right.
And if you've already said it and the computer didn't respond to it, there's no point in saying it again. It's not like jiggling a handle, on something. What they should have done that would have been a lot better is say, okay, now you've got it online. I've fed in the bootstrap mathematical information that's allowed us to understand their mathematical terminology, and now I'm building a vocabulary from there.
Right. Like you could, in fact, probably figure out some of their vocabulary based on, the technology, the way the ship is organized. Like that is obviously we understand warp technology. Yeah. That is that. What do they call that? What does their ship label it as? That sort of thing.
Yeah, but you're going to start with math and science. Okay, yes. Here are the numbers. Here's multiplication. Here's hydrogen. Here's oxygen. What do you call these things?
Right.
And from there, then you build out to, okay, now we've done the universals. What can we do with those locally? Well, you've got a big hydrogen tank over there. I know what the word for hydrogen is. I can figure out the word for tank from that. Stuff like that.
Yeah, it occurs to me that these species that are out there are probably trading with each other. There has to be a lingua franca, a trade language. Mm-hmm. That would be the one that Hoshi should learn. A language of trade. That you would try first.
Yeah, and they may gesture at something like that. I don't know. Later on. They don't in this episode. And obviously in this episode, there's not a lot of time, given everything else that's going on, for them to go into the weeds on this. But they could say, I've established a preliminary link with their translation matrix, and I've got basic vocabulary and grammar coming across.
Right. Now, this all ends up with her having to manually do this all at the end. We'll get to that in a second. But
So the killers show back up, and they're over in a shuttle.
I do want to make a point before the kills. In this scene, Hoshi says to Trip, I'm going to ask the captain to take me home.
Right.
And, okay, they've been going at Warp 5 for 2 weeks in one direction. So he's going to turn the ship around and fly 2 weeks in the wrong direction to drop her off? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That's not happening. You're out here and you're stuck.
I'm on a nuclear submarine with a 5-year mission, and I'm 2 weeks out of dock, and there's no way to come back without severe inconvenience to the mission. I think I'm stuck for a while.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The whole premise of her trying to decide whether to go back or not, it just falls apart, actually, just in the logic of the episode, of the show. Yeah. All right. So the bad guys, who we never actually see on screen, we don't know anything about them.
This is frustrating about this episode. We have a faceless villain. We know nothing about their motives other than they want this triglobulin stuff, and they're apparently more powerful than Enterprise is.
Yes,
and that's all and they have a sinister looking ship that looks like an evil version of the Millennium Falcon.
Yes, it's very angular and all kinds of edgy stuff. So they have to fly back to Enterprise while this ship is coming at them. They have a certain amount of time for it to. These ships can fly across the galaxy in a moment, and then it will take them in a half an hour to fly, 60,000 kilometers. But whatever. The numbers are never Star Trek's strong suit on this sort of thing.
I do like that they're having to get back over on the shuttle as a space battle is happening, and they're like having problems docking with Enterprise in the middle of a space battle. We get to see it like from the shuttle perspective under the saucer,
Yeah.
As they're trying to retract up into the ship. And from inside the shuttle, you're seeing stuff happen outside the shuttle. And you've got everyone from the command crew except T'Pol here, basically. Yeah. And so she's having to run the show from the bridge. And Archer is here helpless. The
shuttle pod arm is unconscionably slow to retract, I have to say.
It really is, yeah.
In fact, later on in the series, it will be a lot quicker to pull them into the ship. They must fix it after this problem. And then it turns out that these hostile aliens are way too strong and their technology is way too advanced for Enterprise. Their torpedo bounces off its shield, although later on it doesn't because the targeting is better. I'm not sure why.
Something like that.
So the friends of the aliens who'd been killed show up. Mm-hmm. And they can't speak to them, and
so Hoshi has to abandon the machine translation that's going, which does not make any sense.
Yeah,
the machine is going to be able to render this better than you, but for dramatic reasons. I mean, you just type in what you want it to say, and it's going to do a better job than you will.
Right.
But for dramatic reasons, Hoshi has to abandon machinery and use the Force and talk directly to the alien.
I mean, this is clearly for the dramatic purposes. This is Hoshi's point at which she realizes she's capable of contributing and being a vital member of the crew, and has to decide to stay with him, and that whole thing. It turns out that we have the captain's log, which reveals everything for us.
Yeah. Oh, before that though, the alien, even though they have trouble convincing the alien to side with them against the bad guys.
Yeah.
Eventually, Hoshi stumbles enough through the conversation that he gets on their side, and suddenly everything is fixed.
Right. He blasts the hostile aliens.
He blasts the hostile aliens, and then that takes the pressure off Enterprise, and so Enterprise is able to, even though the other ship is already disabled, it launches a torpedo at it. And is now successful just to give the humans something to do.
Yes.
And show that they're not just wimps in this fight, even though they are. And then the alien ship blasts the bad guys again, and they totally explode all over the place. So it's really all the aliens doing, not Enterprise at all. But we had to let them get in one little lick in this fight so that they didn't come off as total wimps.
Yeah, the big Guardian shows up, and we kick the bad guy in the shin.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, why did these aliens? We'll find out they're called Axanar, and we'll talk about that name in a second. Yep. Why did the Axanar assume that the Enterprise were the bad guys in this? Like,
well,
that
happens in Hoshi's broken dialogue with it. With the Axanar guy. She says, well, I've started talking to him about this, and now he thinks it's us. So it could be she expressed something in a way that was confusing to him, and he leapt to the wrong conclusion.
Okay, so she just basically fixes her mistake.
Yeah, maybe.
So, like I said, they turn out to be called the Axanar, and that's an important name in Star Trek because Axanar is the site of an important battle with the Klingons later on in Federation history.
Won by Garth of Izar.
And his exploits become required reading in the Academy, and you find out more about that in the original series episodes Court Martial and Whom Gods Destroy.
Mm-hmm. Also, here we learned that Axanar have no gender and live for 400 years. Oh, and they also have green blood and triglobulin fluid.
Right. So we've learned something about the Axanar. And then we end with this little scene of Hoshi contaminating a planet with an alien intrusive species by letting her dying slug go. I'm like,
what about the biological ecological prime directive?
Exactly. Or actually, my preferred imaginary ending is as they walk back to the shuttle, some giant alien bird swoops down and eats the slug.
I know. It's like you have absolutely no guarantee this thing is going to survive.
Right. Yeah. I'm putting you back in your environment to live. And I'm like, actually, as an analogy for Hoshi, I don't think this is actually a very good analogy.
Well, it's kind of on the level of Chakotay having a salamander as his spirit animal. It's like Hoshi has a slug as her avatar.
That's right. So Any other notes on this episode as we
No,
wrap it up?
it was like I said, I was frustrated by a lot of the qualities in the writing. It had some fun moments.
Yep.
I did like the scene with Phlox and Trip. That was fun. It's mildly really what I had here was disappointment. It was just, this could have been a lot better than it was. And it just came across as very ham-fisted, very paint by numbers. They could have done it with a lot more subtlety, and it would have made it a lot more interesting. On the other hand, it's not actively painful in the way that some early first season Next Gen is, but it's also not as ambitious. It's much blander.
They were totally going for the Star Trek is about moral quandaries, and this is the moral quandary episode that we're doing now. So they were clearly going for that. Like, this is what Star Trek is about, sort of feeling. So I agree. It's not the worst. It's not the best. It's sort of meh. So let's get to our feedback from our friends, our listeners. We have the feedback came in on a few weeks ago, so this is going back a few weeks from when you're hearing this, to our episode where we discussed the season finale of Such Sweet Sorrow, Star Trek Discovery, called Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2. Now, because of that, and I know that some of you have not watched Star Trek Discovery and are planning to at some point, and if you are, remember, you could actually subscribe to CBS All Access for $7 a month. Spend a month watching the episodes of this season of Star Trek Discovery, and then cancel and only have spent $7.
Yeah, so someone pointed that out in email to us, in fact.
Right. So what I'm going to suggest is, if you do not want to be spoiled for the finale of season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, is to skip ahead a few minutes or to avoid that. So I just don't want you to be spoiled. I don't like spoilers myself. So that said, we have a Facebook message from one of our listeners, Jonathan, who writes, before I listen to our discussion of Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2, is this going to enhance my enjoyment of the episode? Some people may enjoy the nitpicking of every single plot hole and pointing out all the technical and writing ineptitude, but I don't. There's been a lot of that on the podcast during this season. I understand it's a choice you make as creators, but it doesn't appeal to me. I don't want this to intend to come off sounding negative. I just really want to know if I'm going to enjoy listening to this. Some of them I have this season, some I haven't, because they have been so negative about a show I'm really enjoying. So, Jimmy, I thought we'd talk about,
Yeah, well, to answer his specific question, now obviously there's no way we could know exactly what he would think of our review of the final episode of this season.
Right.
But on balance, I think we were positive about it. I mean, we didn't totally hate on it. I know we pointed out some things that we thought could have been done better, but we didn't hate the episode itself.
On the larger scale of things, so like what we do with this show is we want to talk about the things we liked, the things we didn't like, the things that we think are interesting, the things that point to bigger themes. But there are some podcasts that are all, happy clappy. This is the best ever every episode. There aren't many of those. Let's be honest. There aren't many of those that are like that.
The ones that are like that are usually sucking up to the show's creators to try to get them on. Right. And have some kind of relationship with them.
Exactly. Then there are unfortunately, a lot of shows with YouTube channels or podcasts that are, especially nowadays with Star Trek, very negative nearly all the time on Discovery and other stuff that's new. And in fact, we've talked about this as something infecting fandom in general, where there's a lot more negativity.
Tend to be very polarized these days.
Right. I feel like, and only the listeners can tell us whether we're succeeding in this. I feel like we're pretty balanced. We're trying to be balanced.
Yeah.
We talk about the things we like. We talk about the things we don't like. Some episodes are worse than others. There are some episodes where they do a worse job of writing, like this one where we talked about the fight or flight. They do a worse job of writing it than other episodes, which there are episodes of Enterprise which are really quite good and I really enjoy. And the same thing with Discovery.
In fact, I think as a series, Enterprise gets a bad rap. If you go back and rewatch the individual episodes, it's not as bad as people say. There's a lot more that's good there.
Exactly. Yes, I agree. And so I'm not sure what to tell you, Jonathan. I hope you keep listening. We're not trying to just run it down.
No, in fact, we wouldn't do these podcasts for either Doctor Who or Star Trek if we weren't net positive on them. It's because we're fans of the shows that we're doing them. We may not like every episode. We may not like every series as much. We may not like every showrunner as much, but we're basically fans of the series and are looking at it critically, and in terms of critically in the good sense of sorting the good from the bad. And I mean, personally, that's what I have to offer. I think like a writer, and we have differences on the show. I think in terms of plot and character, I very much care less about like starship design. But I know Dom,
I love it,
has that appeals to him in a big way, and so he's able to speak to that subject in a way that I'm not. So, but what we are trying to do is take a fair appraisal of these things, and the insights I have are mostly about plot. So if you may fault me if you think I'm picking out too many plot holes, but that's the contribution I have. I think plot mechanics are what stimulate my brain. And in fact, I've had friends who were writing novels and they'll call me up to solve plot problems for them. So that's just kind of the way my mind works. But I also try to balance when I do point out, here's a plot hole, that this wouldn't work this way in the real world. I'll also try to point out, well, here's why the writers are doing it, because it communicates this to the audience. And so there is a function, even though it's actually not believable, there is a reason. Like pointing out, you would never abandon the machine translation to go to spoken in this situation.
Right.
But there's a reason they do that for the audience, because it shows Hoshi more visibly rising to the challenge. Right. And then I also try to balance it by pointing out things I like the fun scene in the mess hall with Trip and Phlox.
Yeah, I mean, Frank, honestly, I mean, your feedback is a good example of that, because it's not just pointing out the negative, but it also points out the positive of our show. And I want to hear from listeners.
Dom is getting meta.
That's a little bit meta, yeah. So I'd love to hear from listeners. And in fact, thank you, Jonathan, for bringing this up, because it helps us examine ourselves and see how we're doing with our goal for talking about these shows. And we love to get critical feedback. Critical, again, in that sense of the positive and negative. What we're doing well, what we're not doing well, things you'd like to see. So write to us, let us know, or send us an audio recording. We'd love to hear your voice of, what do you think? How are we doing with the show? How are we doing with our discussions? If you think that maybe things we could do better. I'm not going to guarantee we can change to suit every possibility, but we certainly want to take those into account. So please, let's hear from you. So we have a little more feedback from, this one is from Bennett, our friend Bennett. He says, this is the only place worth commenting and expecting to get a polite hearing. Thank you, Ben, about Star Trek Discovery, I think. And this is a little bit of counterpoint. I don't think it's the only place, but thank you, Bennett. He says, I enjoyed Discovery. I liked season 1 much more when I learned the twist, which explained how the crew was so different from other Trek crews as the influence of their leader. I rewatched it and enjoyed it much more. Season 2 I enjoyed so much as I went along. I agree with so much of all your comments on the failings. Most episodes had complexity. With new leadership in the chair, it felt more Trek. But I came away perplexed because I feel like the story arc could have been completed in a 2-parter if they wanted to. So I have a conflicting relationship with Season 2. I do look forward to Season 3 and being free of the shackles they found themselves with. Thank you as always, says Bennett.
Yeah, and I agree. I think Season 2, it certainly, they were striving to connect up more with existing Star Trek in terms of canon and feel. And that's, again, like we talked about in this episode of Enterprise, you as part of a longer series arc, you don't want to start where you end up. And sometimes, people blame you for that because it's not familiar to them. It feels different. And Discovery has suffered from that also as a prequel, because we know where the Star Trek franchise goes story-wise, and Discovery is not at the end of that journey. In terms of season 2, I thought it was really more successful on the character level and the dialogue level. The special effects were great, but that's not why I'm here. In terms of character arcs and dialogue, I think they broadly succeeded there. I think on the plot level, it had some interesting stuff. It broke some new ground for Star Trek plot-wise, but also it had some pretty big plot holes.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, you're right in some sense that this could have been the whole thing with Control and Leland and all that could have been a long two-parter, really. And we could have had more standalone episodes that just mission of the week sort of thing, like we traditionally we are used to. And I would have welcomed that. I would have liked that. Would have been a nice break. But so I agree. And I don't really have much more to add than that. So I think you both have really covered that really well. So we have a final email from John Scrivo, who says, Happy Easter, Dom, Jimmy, and Father Corey. Happy Easter,
Thank
John.
you.
I just got caught up on watching the finale and your excellent analysis. I had lots of thoughts and questions, so feel free to pick and choose. Well, I'll read them off here as we go. For fans who haven't watched, he mentions the subscribe now and watch it for $7 the whole season. That's a good point. He says, besides the sheer number, has Star Trek ever used shuttles in battle? It seems very Star Wars-esque. I think in DS9's Dominion War stuff, there were battles that had a lot of small ships.
Certainly runabouts got used in Deep Space Nine, and I don't recall if in the original series we ever had shuttles in battle.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I would remember that. He said also, and I read this in some reviews, why do they still need to travel to the future once Leland and Control... Okay, remember, spoilers. Once Leland and Control are defeated, were they too close to the wormhole at that point to get back? Because Leland was dead. Yeah,
I think the rationale there is we're going to the future to prevent this from ever happening again, which seems kind of weak to me.
Yeah, it is a bit weak. It says Cornwell's death was really pointless. Besides the flaws you guys mentioned, what about using the Wally repair bots to flip the lever and shut the door?
Yeah, good point.
That is a good point. Poor Wally. And then he says, it seems Pike is much more cynical of Starfleet than we thought. The Boy Scout lied to his superiors.
He did on a number of occasions, but he always, he didn't leap to that the way James T. Kirk did. He always said, is there a compelling reason that forces me to go this way?
And in the end, that final episode, that season finale, he was lying about Discovery being destroyed. I think because of that, there was a very good reason to do so.
Yeah, except I don't agree, but yeah.
Right, exactly.
He thought there was.
And then speaking of which, why does Starfleet seem so sketchy in this series? I think Starfleet has been sketchy in the past, and certainly in DS9 it was. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the Admiral, and even in TNG, there were Admirals. There was that episode. There was the Pegasus.
There was the Pegasus thing. There was the conspiracy storyline.
Right.
All of those had shady stuff going on in Starfleet.
Yeah, Starfleet is like any human organization. There are people who are doing the wrong thing or doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And then says the ending of the episode made me really wish we had an entire series for Pike's Enterprise.
Yeah, I agree. Lots of people have been saying that.
And if we hope enough, maybe they'll the powers that be have indicated that it's not impossible. So. We can hope. So thank you very much for your feedback, everyone. That's very much appreciated. So let's, before we close out here, I do want to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Trek, including James K., Alfredo B., Ed B., Mary V., and Miguel G. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. What do you think of this Enterprise episode, Fight or Flight? Or as I mentioned before, what do you think of how we're doing with Secrets of Star Trek? It's an open-ended invitation for your feedback. So go to sqpn.com/trek or the SQPN Facebook page. Leave us some feedback there on the episode or send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Oh, I'm so excited because perhaps my favorite Star Trek movie, and I get to watch it again. So really excited.
Yay.
Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, insist on letting your curiosity dictate your actions.